Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
We're jumping straight in today.
Absolutely. We are starting with a deep dive into, well, the very foundation of India's constitutional framework.
The office of the governor.
Exactly. It has landed squarely back on the national agenda, hasn't it? What with the recent Supreme Court judgment and that 16th presidential reference.
It has, and to really get it, you have to go all the way back to the Constituent Assembly debates, back to 1949.
Because it's so critical to understand the original intent here. I mean, the framers were deeply concerned about this office.
Oh, deeply. They were strongly against the idea of a nominated governor.
So why that immediate opposition? What was the fear?
The fear was that the governor would be completely, remote controlled.
It's an agent of the center.
Precisely. A replica of the viceroy's nominees. They had just fought against a centralized colonial power. The last thing they wanted was to recreate it within their own system.
That makes perfect sense. But Dr. B.R. Ambedkar offered a sort of fundamental assurance on this, didn't he, to try and settle the issue?
He did. He argued that the governor is not meant to be an agent of the center. Not at all.
His vision was.
That's why.
His vision was crystal clear. The governor must be a purely constitutional governor. And his job, he insisted, is just to make the parliamentary system work, not to rival the elected ministry.
That's such a powerful line. A facilitator, not a political power player.
Exactly. And that whole concept of discretionary powers that we hear so much about today, and Ambedkar addressed that directly. He said, his discretion is a very limited discretion. It only applies in a few very specific constitutionally mentioned cases, like picking a chief minister.
And he warned against reading more into it.
He was emphatic. He said the governor is not to be an interfering authority. Full stop.
It's fascinating how those historical objections connect directly to today's issues, especially the power to withhold assent to bills.
Absolutely. Even back then, you had leaders like N.G. Ranga saying a bill passed by an elected legislature should not be at the mercy of a nominated governor.
They saw it as just discretionary power under another guise. Yes. And again, Ambedkar's assurance was very restrictive. He clarified that reserving bills for the president is not some general override. It's for a limited class of cases.
For example?
Things that might endanger the center's position or, violate fundamental constitutional principles. He was clear. The governor is not expected to sit in judgment over bills.
And yet here we are today, seeing exactly what the framers feared. It's like some governors are determined to prove Ambedkar's optimism was misplaced.
It really is, and it brings you right back to that provocative question from former President K.R. Narayan.
We have to consider whether it is the Constitution that has failed us or whether it is we who have failed the Constitution.
Exactly. When the text says as soon as possible, and that's being treated as late as possible, it's pretty clear who is failing whom.
That constitutional friction, that strain between the center and the states, it doesn't just play out in politics. It's painfully obvious when it comes to disaster financing.
It really is. This asymmetry, this growing gap between what states need after a disaster and what they actually get, it points to a big shift.
A drift away from cooperative federalism.
Towards something more conditional, more centralized.
And the Wayanad tragedy in Kerala in July 2024 is just a devastating, immediate example of this gap.
A terrible example. After those landslides, the state estimated its loss at about 2,200 crore rupees.
And what did the union approve?
It was 260 crore.
Barely 11% of what they needed. A massive shortfall for a state to manage.
So we have this two-tier structure, right? The SDRF at the state level and the NDRF at the national level. Why is it failing so badly?
Well, there are a few systemic issues. First, the relief norms themselves are just rigid and really outdated.
How so?
For instance, the compensation for a life lost is capped at 4 lakh rupees. That hasn't changed in a decade. It might cover immediate needs, but it does almost nothing for long-term recovery.
And I believe there's ambiguity in the law itself.
There is. It doesn't clearly define what makes a disaster severe, which just leaves the door open for bureaucratic discretion when releasing national funds.
So it's slow, it's procedural. I found the center's justification in the Wayanad case really telling. They pointed to Kerala's unspent SDRF balance, 780 crore, as a reason to give less.
Right. And this is where the state's counterargument is so important. They argue that SDRF rules only allow spending on immediate relief.
So they have to keep reserve.
They have to, especially since funds often arrive late. They need that liquidity to be ready for the next disaster.
This is where looking at international practices can be, a real aha moment.
What could we learn?
Well, countries like the U.S. with FEMA, or even Mexico's old fondant system, they used objective, data-driven triggers. Things like rainfall limits or per capita damage thresholds that trigger automatic fund release.
Precisely. If India adopted similar clear parameters, maybe based on lost GSDP ratios, we could replace discretion with predictability.
And that would speed everything up and, crucially, help restore some trust in the whole system of federal transfers.
Moving now into our spotlight section, we're turning to the criminal justice system and looking at a deeply, disconcerting pattern.
The sheer number of death row acquittals coming from the Supreme Court.
It's staggering. For 3 years straight, the court hasn't confirmed a single death sentence. And this year alone, they've acquitted 9 prisoners.
And in each case, they're flagging grave investigative and evidentiary lapses.
You really can't overstate the human cost of these failures. We're talking about lives hanging in the balance, decided not by guilt or innocence, but by shoddy police work or poor legal aid.
These are not just statistics, these are stolen lives.
Let's start with Rakesh's story. He spent over 11 years in custody, accused of murdering his wife and his 2 infant sons.
And the physical toll. His father, Kailash, actually put off a major necessary surgery until Rakesh finally came home after his acquittal.
The Supreme Court found the entire case was just marred by compromised evidence.
And then there's Krishna. 12 years on death row. He's out now, but he's homeless, surviving on charity. He's afraid to even mention his past because, in his words, nights can turn dangerous.
What was his case based on?
An uncorroborated extrajudicial confession. That's it. And the Supreme Court rightly found that wasn't nearly enough to uphold a death sentence.
And Manoj's story is just as heartbreaking. He was arrested at 18, along with his father and uncle.
The 3 earning members of the family.
Gone, just like that. His family completely collapsed. His siblings had to drop out of school. And the reason for his acquittal?
An astounding investigative lapse. The police never bothered to examine the original owner of the SIM card that was supposedly used for a ransom call. It's a basic, fundamental step.
These cases just highlight institutional failure across the board. Take legal aid. Rakesh's legal aid lawyer just failed to show up for key hearings.
Which forced his family, already struggling, to sell jewelry and land just to hire a competent lawyer. It shows a dangerous lack of quality standards in our legal aid system.
And the investigative failures are profound. A former DGP, Sulkhan Singh, he noted that police often struggled to properly document the trail of evidence.
So even if evidence is genuine, it loses credibility in court.
And it's been nearly 20 years since the Prakash Singh police reforms were mandated. Most are still just on paper.
But the most disturbing part, for me, is the element of custodial torture.
Absolutely. Both Rakesh and Manoj said they were forced to sign blank sheets of paper,
which were later filled in and used as evidence against them. That reveals a system that's more about closing a case than finding the truth.
And after all that, after decades of wrongful imprisonment, the ultimate injustice is that India has no statute, no law, that recognizes a right to compensation.
So these people are forced to petition the Supreme Court directly, citing constitutional violations just to get some help to rebuild the lives that were stolen from them. They have to keep fighting the system even after they're free.
Our next source takes us into the world of quick commerce and gig work, focusing on urban safety in Bengaluru.
Right, the whole premise of 10-minute deliveries. It's putting completely unrealistic and frankly dangerous pressure on delivery personnel.
Especially in a city with notoriously bad traffic. And the data here it's shocking.
It is. Traffic violations by delivery personnel, they've just skyrocketed from around 31,000 in 2023 to nearly 64,000 in just the first 9 months of 2025.
You're exactly right. This isn't just a few reckless individuals. It's a systemic problem. And the consequence, as Commissioner Singh noted, is that footpaths are now seen as open territory for motorists.
The rules of the road become irrelevant when you're racing a 10-minute clock.
And it's not just traffic. Law and order cases have also jumped, from 7 last year to 24 this year. Things like theft, enabled by companies not doing proper background checks.
And there's a really strange regulatory gap here too, isn't there, with the EV scooters?
There is. These micromobility EV scooters they use cause all sorts of violations, but legally, they're treated like bicycles.
So it's incredibly difficult to enforce the Motor Vehicle Act.
Meanwhile, the pressure on the workers is just immense. They face warnings, fines, even deactivation for delays. Customers abuse them.
And this mix of pressure, night incentives, and the rating system, it actively pushes them toward risky behavior. People like Gajendra Singh and Naveen Raj, they're basically penalized for choosing safety over speed.
And all this goes back to a major legislative failure. The aggregators get out of it by calling themselves service providers, not employers.
Right. And the recent central labor codes completely failed to include gig workers, so there's no formal accountability for safe working conditions.
We also have to remember that these workers, who are often migrants, are also frequent victims of crime themselves.
Especially late-night phone theft. Criminals know they depend on those devices for everything, so they're exposed to risk from all sides.
So what's the city's response? The Bengaluru police are trying a new fix accountability or book approach.
Forcing the aggregator's hands.
Exactly. They've issued mandatory guidelines, background checks, GPS tracking, SOS features, and since direct laws are missing, they plan to use indirect ones, like the Parakamani Sanhita, and even recommend license cancellations for the aggregators themselves.
Forcing them to internalize the cost of their own dangerous business model.
Now we turn to a really fascinating and frankly deeply disturbing case of alleged corruption and compromise at the Tirumala Temple.
This involves the Parakamani Hall, where offerings are counted.
The whole thing started in April 2023. A clerk, Rami Kumar, was caught during the counting process hiding 9 $100 bills in his clothes.
About 72,000 rupees. A clear-cut case of theft.
But what happened next was just bizarre. Instead of normal prosecution, there was this unusually quick compromise.
The accused donated 7 properties, valued at 14 crore rupees, to the Temple Trust, the TTD.
And then in September 2023, the criminal case was just settled at a Lok Adalat, citing religious sensitivity.
But the story unraveled after a tragic death. The original complainant, the key witness, Y. Satish Kumar, was found dead on railway tracks in November 2025.
He was on his way to an inquiry. His brother alleges it was murder.
And an internal TTD probe later found that Satish had been under extreme pressure to settle that case.
Fortunately, a journalist's petition brought it to the High Court, which just recently set aside the compromise and ordered a fresh CID probe.
This raises a huge legal question, doesn't it? Can a temple trust just compromise on a criminal theft case?
Well, according to former TTD executive officer L.V. Subramaniam, no. He says there's no provision in the TTD laws that allows for a deal like that.
So the temple management, as a public trust, should have just followed the law, not tried to strike some private deal. The whole thing, especially now with the mysterious death attached, is just deeply troubling.
For our final discussion, we're going overseas to Tehran, where something is happening that would have been, well, unthinkable just a few years ago.
Women are openly defying the mandatory hijab in public.
Especially in northern neighborhoods like Valley Azur Street. It's a massive shift.
And the catalyst was, without a doubt, the 2022 death of Mahsa Amini. That moment enraged women of all ages, and it turned defiance from an isolated act into a widespread norm.
What's really remarkable is the muted response from the authorities. After decades of strict enforcement, why aren't they cracking down harder?
Well, analysts like Holly Daggeras suggest they're just overwhelmed by the sheer numbers.
Too many people to control.
Exactly. And there's a real political risk. They're worried that a major crackdown right now, when the country is dealing with a rotten economy, power cuts, and the war with Israel, it could be the spark that sends everyone back into the streets.
And the visual evidence is everywhere. Young girls taking off their scarves the second they leave school, women walking uncovered through the Tajrish Bazaar, right past police who don't do anything.
Even in luxury hotels, signs asking women to observe the hijab are just being ignored. It's like a collective, silent revolution.
It's a huge political tightrope for the regime. You have hardliners pushing for enforcement.
But the reformist president, Pezeshkian, has been arguing for a right to choose. So for now, it seems the supreme leader has prioritized the economy and external threats over the hijab laws.
But even with this newfound freedom, the psychological scars remain, don't they?
They do. There's this one poignant detail about an Iranian woman who moved to Canada. She said she still instinctively reaches for her headscarf when she's driving. It just shows how deep the fear and habit run, even when you're free.
Thinking across all these articles today, from the governor's role to disaster finance, the flaws in our justice system, the gig economy, there's a really profound shared thread here.
Institutional frameworks, be they constitutional safeguards, police reforms, or labor laws, are just constantly failing to protect individual realities.
And if it's always the citizens who have to absorb the costs of these systemic failures, whether it's years of wrongful conviction or dangerous delivery quotas, we'd have to seriously consider what level of accountability we need to demand from the very institutions designed to serve and protect them.
That's the core question.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day